We're back now with Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Michael Gerson, columnist for The Washington Post, plus two of the busiest campaign reporters out there, Jonathan Martin of The New York Times and Ed O'Keefe of The Washington Post. Susan, I want to begin with you. Sum all of this Donald Trump business up. What's the political fallout? Where do things stand for him now?
You know, if he were a conventional candidate, he would be toast. It would be over. We would move on and talk to who the real nominee is going to be. But he has defied all that conventional analysis up to now. He has exceeded the expectations of everyone except himself. And I think that should make us humble about assuming that this is the end, that this is the peak of Donald Trump. That said, here's the great dilemma he presents for the Republican Party. They need to figure out a way to distance themselves from Donald Trump while embracing the people who are attracted by Donald Trump. And that is something Republicans have not yet figured out how to do.
Have to put one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. Yeah. Michael Gerson, challenge for the Republican Party.
Well, the plus side is 24 million people tuned in and saw 4 or 5 candidates that could actually win an election, but Donald Trump was not one of them in this. You know, he on stage, he didn't even show a minimal knowledge of issues while calling everyone else stupid. And so when you strip away all the bluster, there's more bluster underneath. I think that really, you know, disqualifies him as a candidate. But, you know, this is not a typical season. And he made the biggest threat of that night, the political threat, which is to run as a third party. And that would be deeply destructive to Republican chances. Yeah.
And by the way, that is something that's being talked about by some folks in the party as possible leverage to keep him out of future debates, that pledge to that he won't take. And it's being talked about. The downside of doing that is if you do that, you probably ensure that he does run as a third-party candidate. And so there is this internal uncertainty of how do we keep him sort of, you know, repressed, but at the same time not push him to a third-party candidate any sooner than he actually might go. What's fascinating is the lack of urgency from the campaigns themselves that I've heard since that debate. You don't hear the campaigns themselves saying, we've got to stop this guy, keep him off the debate stage. And the reason why? They got 24 million viewers, not just for Trump, but for their candidates too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Ed O'Keefe, who do you think benefited the most quickly from 24 million people getting a good look at him?
I think 3 people, and one of them wasn't even on stage, Carly Fiorina. John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, probably helped by the hometown crowd to some extent. And certainly Marco Rubio, the senator of Florida, reminded a lot of people why he's in this race and why he could emerge as a very effective party spokesman.
I want to pick up something that you said when we were talking earlier. You talked about maybe keeping Donald Trump out of the future debates. I want to read you something that Lindsey Graham said in response to Trump's fight with Megyn Kelly. He said, I think we've crossed that Rubicon, where his behavior becomes about us, not just him. I hope the party leadership will push hard. We've crossed a line here that can't be ignored. There's no more tiptoeing around this. Who is the party leadership who's going to do this?
Well, that's the problem, is that the RNC could put out a statement, but they can't control what these networks do in terms of who is or is not invited. And if you think that the networks, after the amount of viewers who watch that debate on Thursday night, are going to keep Trump out, then you don't understand how TV works. And the fact is, he is going to keep showing up at these things as long as he wants to do so. And so the party is handcuffed to him. And the long-term difficulty is that at some point, you can see a scenario where he says, I said if you guys didn't treat me with respect, I was going to go third party, and you haven't. And I'm now running third party. And therein lies the challenge. And then he does that for a few more months. So it's a long-term challenge for the GOP.
Let's assess the other candidates at the moment. Michael, you said, you know, the 24 million got to see some other people on stage. Right. Who else looked good to you on that stage?
Well, Rubio and Christie are low in the polls, but they've got first-tier skills, you could tell. And candidate quality matters over time. I think you have to give Christie some props for seriousness in the debate. He raised entitlement reform. He's actually put out policies on this. That could swamp everything, you know, people want to do in the future. So I think he had serious, you know, intervention there. And, you know, Bush had a B or B+ night, maybe. He answered all the right answers on the tough questions that related to him. He had a good answer on immigration, but he really only showed a flare of passion on school choice and was flat in some of the other parts of the evening.
I would count Bush as the big loser of the night, actually, not because he made a mistake, because as you say, he didn't make a mistake. But Peggy Noonan, who's often a friend of Face the Nation, described him as looking like a bespectacled man thinking about dinner. And that seemed to me pretty apt. You know, if you want to be president, you need to look like you want to be president. You need to have some energy. You need to have some passion, particularly if you're trying to prevail in a summer of Trump. And I thought that he failed to do that. And I think you're going to see some of these other candidates who did show a little energy doing better in the next couple of weeks.
And the Bush camp certainly concedes that guys like Rubio, Kasich, Walker might see a little bit of an increase, but they're still pretty comfortable with where they are. They would say, look, this was the floor, that there are going to be several more of these debates to come. The mere fact that they were the sort of sober, mature guy standing next to Donald Trump as 24 million people watched is enough to remind these Republicans, well, gosh, if I don't like that cantankerous guy, at least we have someone like him in the race. He certainly is not a flashy guy. Pizzazz is not his thing. But their goal was, don't make any mistakes. Do this for the first time in 13 years, because he hasn't been on a debate stage since 2002, and over again remind people of the record.
Not good enough, I don't think, in a field like this. And the original front runner, you know, you looked at Kasich. Kasich looked like Bush with some oomph. Yep. You know, another two-term governor from a key state, same age, right. Lots of credentials. Now, Kasich's got his own problems, potential flaws as a candidate. But if you were looking for an adult in the room, there was another adult in the room that was showing a little more passion.
But if you're a Republican, though, this is a sort of good night and a bad night. It's a good night because, my goodness, we got some presidents on that stage. Yep. This is not the 2012 campaign all over again. The more sort of nerve-wracking side is, number one, what do we do about Trump? Oh my gosh, this thing is really sort of live wire, live ammo over here. But the other issue is this race is really uncertain, and that can be kind of exciting and it can be energizing, but at the same time, it can also be a little bit nerve-wracking because you just don't know what's going to happen. To Susan's point, Jeb Bush didn't look like a front runner up there. That debate night proved just how uncertain this race is. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Even putting Trump aside, it's the most fluid campaign on the Republican side I can recall in decades.
And also being, somebody used the word fade when talking about Jeb Bush. In other words, you don't have to have histrionics and get all excited and jumpy, but you have to show that you have a little blood pressure. Michael Gerson, I want to ask you about Carly Fiorina. She got rave reviews for being crisp and sharp, but she's also, you know, number 11, or there were 10 people on that first stage, she was on the second stage. What has to happen for her to vault?
She got a social media slingshot, and I think it's real. It's real. That was the purpose of that, you know, kind of lower card. One person emerged and I think got some serious attention. And I think she will be on the stage the next time. I think she plays an important role. She's really attacking Clinton in this, has tough attacks that I think Republicans are going to like. And she can do it with some standing.
But she's also uniquely perched to hit Jeb Bush for the stumble he made on women's health funding, and then to hit Trump for going after Megyn Kelly. Exactly. Nobody else on stage can do that, which is why they should want her on that stage next time, because it will remind viewers, look, we may have him, but we also have her.
Though she wouldn't quite own up to the Bush name there when she made the attack again on our show. Susan, I want to switch now to you, to the Democratic side. Bernie Sanders had a huge rally in Washington and Seattle, but he was interrupted again by Black Lives Matter protesters. Why are they going after just Bernie Sanders?
Well, Bernie Sanders had a misstep in their view by talking about Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. And for the proponents of the Black Lives Matter movement, that reflects a misunderstanding of exactly what kind of point they're trying to make. On the other hand, Bernie Sanders can't complain. He's a protest candidate, right? So attracting protesters is something that gives so it shows that there's some energy and conflict in the Democratic side as well as the Republican side.
Right. I mean, it might have been Bernie Sanders doing that kind of thing 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It's this fascinating revelation, though, about the Democratic Party and where it was and where it is now. Bernie Sanders comes out of a sort of class-based, traditional social democratic wing of the party. The party is now much more shaped by gender and racial politics, and I think Bernie Sanders is having a hard time accommodating that. He finally is now, but you can tell it's not really who he is. When he spoke to an Hispanic group last week in Washington, he made a comment. He said, "Before I talk about your issues." I mean, so he really comes out of a sort of class solidarity, liberal politics, and he's trying to put on the Democratic Party head of 2015, and it's a sight to see.
It is telling that he's on this West Coast swing, had a huge rally last night in Seattle, has another big one today in Portland, we'll do Los Angeles tomorrow. In Seattle, bad on stage, notable, only his 4th campaign fundraiser of the year. The minimum was only $200, which should tell you something compared to everyone else. So, you know, he may be this populist, and he says he doesn't raise a lot of big money, telling that when others are raising $2,700 at these events, he's only asking for $200.
Michael, I want to ask you about Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat, number 3 in leadership in the Senate, came out against President Obama's deal with, or Iran nuclear deal. How big a deal is that?
Well, it was President Obama's plan to go into the recess, the congressional recess, with momentum. And he did that with Senator Kaine, Senator Nelson. A bunch of people announced their support for the plan. This interrupted that momentum. And I think the important, and angered the administration. And they responded pretty angrily, talking about his future in Democratic politics, which was pretty severe. The problem here is that Schumer did not just make a statement. He actually made an argument. He made a 1,500-word argument that when you compare that to the president's American University speech, it's pretty compelling. And that will now marinate the debate in Congress going into 4 weeks, where the American public opposes the deal in some of the polling by 2 to 1. Where members are not going to hear reinforcement in their districts in many ways. So I think this opened up the debate again.
And I think a miscalculation on the part of the White House, it seems to me, because not a surprise Chuck Schumer is going to oppose this deal. It would have been a surprise if Chuck Schumer had come out and endorsed this deal.
Explain that for people who may not.
Because he is one of the biggest advocates for Israel that there is in the United States. Israel is very much opposed to this, says it reflects an existential threat to them. So it would have been amazing if Chuck Schumer had not come out against this deal. He came out against it, but he acknowledged you could be for the deal and still have a fair point of view, that there were arguments on both sides. And he's also not whipping this vote. He's not trying to get his colleagues, his Democratic colleagues, to go with him on this vote. That is a favor to the White House.
And that's a key point, because while these liberal groups are going to come out and say he isn't worthy of being the next Democratic leader in the Senate, the White House will raise concerns. If he sits on his hands, he's fine. Also remember, the only people that get the vote are Democratic senators themselves for their next leader. Right now, he's got them all in the bag. He'll be fine.
Yeah, the White House is overstating the possibility that Schumer's not going to be the next leader because of this. And frankly, the opponents of the deal are overstating Chuck Schumer's impact on the rest of the caucus. I think both sides are a little bit off here.
And he doesn't need their money. He's from New York.
The president's overreaching in his rhetoric on everyone, not just the Democrats in Congress, but essentially accusing Republicans of being for war, accusing Republicans of being in common, cause with the mullahs. That is a tremendous overreach in his rhetoric, and it's hard to explain. I mean, I think, will get the votes to sustain this deal, and he's had a hard time resisting a very divisive, polarizing language on this deal.
Ed, imagine if during the Bush administration, President Bush had said those people who are against our actions, whether it be in Iraq or Afghanistan, are in common cause with the terrorists.
Some Democrats would suggest that's the kind of thing he did do back in the day. So, I mean, and a lot of people said this week he was taking a page from the George W. Bush playbook, whether you like it or not. And, Republicans, to some extent, justifiably stood up this week and said that's not the right answer. But, look, Bernie Sanders made the same argument. The only other alternative is potential war with Iran. If that's the argument they continue to make over the 6 weeks that Congress isn't in town, that argument might build favor.
But to Michael's point, the pointed language does not match where he is in the process. Like you would think, given that speech, that he was really back against the wall. It seems pretty likely that he's going to be able to find the votes to override or to block a veto.
We'll see. Susan, I want to pivot here as we move to the end. Hillary Clinton jumped on some remarks this week by Jeb Bush that Carly Fiorina mentioned. He was supposed to be talking about Planned Parenthood. He said he didn't think we needed to spend money on women's health issues. What was Hillary Clinton's? What was she up to there?
Well, this is catnip for Democrats and for Hillary Clinton, because the kind of offhand comment that Jeb Bush made feeds into the idea that Republicans do not, in fact, have Republican women's interests, do not have women's interests at heart. They can't be trusted to protect the interest of women. And since there's a greater chance that Jeb Bush is going to be the nominee than Donald Trump, I think it does. She's even more pleased to have Jeb Bush do this kind of misstep, which he then tried to backtrack on, than it is to have some of the outrageous comments that we've heard from Donald Trump.
And it's a good distraction, too. She has problems. I mean, she has an unfolding email scandal. It's hard to be transparent about something like this when you've got a server in your basement that you're not surrendering. I mean, that is a long-term problem for her. She is running a campaign that seems to be hemorrhaging money and losing support. Democrats are looking at this. So I think she needs diversion here. And she does have some vulnerability on the populist left, which I think Bernie Sanders is showing. I don't think he can exploit it all the way, but I think he's showing that there's some room there on the left.
But bottom line, this is crass politics. You talk to Democrats privately, they are most petrified of the prospects of either a Jeb Bush or a Marco Rubio being their nominee, because they know that can eat into Hispanic support.
Florida.
The more they call it, and Florida, the more they call it out now, the more it'll be reminding voters that in a year, if they're the nominee, they had said all these things back in the day.
Ed O'Keefe, thanks so much. Thanks to all of you.